Hello everybody, this is Michael Hollands once again for Sound of the Movies. Today I have the pleasure to be joined by Academy Award winner Stephen Price. On today's episode, we will focus on his diverse career as a music editor, programmer and composer. Stephen Price has written the scores for projects such as The World's End, Gravity, Fury, Suicide Squad, American Assassin, Our Planet, and many more. His new score, Aeronauts, has been released digitally on November 1st. Welcome, Stephen.
Hello there, how are you doing?
I'm pretty good, and you? Thank you so much for joining me today.
It's a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Great to have you. Stephen, if I am correct, you had started studying music at a very early age, which also involved extensive guitar lessons. How did you go from there? How did you learn your craft?
Yeah, I was just really lucky to grow up in a house that had a lot of instruments in it. So there were kind of guitars knocking around and sort of an organ thing that I would play. So I kind of it never really struck me as anything out of the ordinary just to play things all the time. So I was always picking things up, and my folks noticed early on I was doing that. So I started getting guitar lessons at about the age of 5, which was kind of great because it kind of meant that the muscles in your hand grew in a certain way, and it was just like the most natural thing in the world to sort of pick things up at that age anyway. But converting it into working, I kind of never really thought of doing anything else. I remember having interviews at university about careers and things like that, and they would always try and point you into the direction of a proper job. And I was always kind of like, no, I'm gonna do music. I'm gonna do music in films and things. And it's actually the film side of it I didn't grasp till a little later on, but I definitely knew that music was the thing for me. And I kind of just took the approach that I would keep getting involved in stuff. And I remember after college, I got a job at a recording studio, just making tea initially and sort of being useful. But being useful meant that you ended up doing a bit of arranging, or you did a little bit of programming some drums for someone, or playing a piano part or something. And gradually, it just sort of it grew out of that. And through working in a recording studio, I got to meet a film composer at the end of the last century, and that kind of just changed my life. Really, just taught me that there was this area where you could tell stories and make music, and all the things I'd ever enjoyed doing, and it all could come into one sort of job. So that led into a long time of working in film music and doing all sorts of jobs. I arranged for people, I orchestrated for people, every job you can possibly imagine, just hoping that one day you get the opportunity to write yourself.
You worked for quite a few composers, as you just said yourself, and one of them was Trevor Jones. You had worked with him and also contributed music to some of his scores, and also, I think you also did some arrangements. How would you describe your learning experience working with such a tremendously experienced composer such as Trevor Jones?
Well, that's the thing, really. It was this voice of experience. You'd be working on something, and you thought you'd got things working, and you thought you got the rhythm of the cue right, and you thought it was really playing to the picture. And he would often just sort of, take one look at it and just have these really concise notes about, oh, that needs to happen there, that needs to happen there. And then you'd look at it and go, of course it does. It's so obvious now you've told me. But it was like just this experience of he'd been doing films for, 20, 30 years at least by that stage, and some big things, some small things, all sorts of different genres. And so he just kind of, he had the eye, so you could just, it was a really fantastic, useful thing, really, to just be able to talk about, a scene and how he would look at a scene and what the role of music would be within that was just a really interesting thing to be around, and I got lucky in the timing of that job, in that he was looking for someone to sort of work alongside him and do programming, sit with him really as he wrote every day. So you'd just go through scene on scene and get through entire film scores sitting next to the guy writing the tunes, and it was really it was a great education, actually. Hard work, but a great education.
Before you started writing music on your own, before you became the lead composer on several big films, you had been involved in many projects, either as a mixer or a music editor or guitarist, and then eventually in 2002 you had worked as the music editor on The Lord of the Rings, The Two Towers, which was a humongous project with all, big and fantastic score by Howard Shore. Could you please tell me a bit about your experience on this film and how this tremendous opportunity came about?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing to say with that is that you know, I was not the sole music editor on that project. They were just huge, mammoth projects, and I actually got involved for the DVD, the expanded DVD of the first film. So they'd made the first film, and there was a team in place at Abbey Road, working sort of on the recording, mixing, editing side of things, and they basically needed someone else to come in. It was such a big job. So I got the call for the DVD extras of the first one, and we kind of did, it was something like 25, 30 minutes of extra material I think we did for that. And from then on, I was on the projects right to the end, and we did the film and then the DVD expanded thing every year. So you're kind of living at Abbey Road for 4 months of each year, which was just amazing. But it came up literally through being known there as someone who worked for other composers, you know. So I was at Abbey Road a lot, and that's where the team was based. And it was a conversation with the manager of the time there, and it was, you know, would you be interested in doing this? It's like, God, of course, you know. And I loved the first film, I loved the books, and the work itself was a really sort of, it was a real team effort. You know, every day there'd be a team recording the music, and there would be people taking notes there of what takes were good, and they would do a huge amount of takes. And because that project was so well budgeted, you know, they would literally play a piece for a day, you know, and you might get hundreds and hundreds of takes for a piece of music. And then we'd get that in, we'd work out what the good bits were, we'd edit them together. If the picture changed, we'd have to cover that as well. And it was just fascinating seeing how Howard did those scores. You know, there were such massive undertakings, and the thematic links between not only characters within one film, but over the entire trilogy. And this sort of, you know, this epic project that he took on and pulled off, and some amazing music there, all recorded in these huge rooms and this big, massive sound, which technically was a very tricky thing for everyone involved, because, you know, you're often matching recordings that were done in 3 different studios, because they would, you know, constantly be revising these things. So it was kind of a really technical job in lots of ways, that one. But you were kind of always aware that the films were great, and every Christmas I'd go and watch the films with my family, and you were kind of aware that you had this very small involvement in this massive thing. So it was a lot of fun to do.
I mean, the films were huge, and they still hold up. I mean, there's a huge fan base of The Lord of the Rings, and yeah. I think you also came back for The Return of the King, which is the big culmination of the trilogy. And I'm sure some folks tuning in right now are familiar with the tasks of a music editor. But then again, many people may not know what exactly a music editor does. Could you please elaborate on that and how you worked on The Lord of the Rings, The Two Towers, and The Return of the King?
Yeah, it was on that job. It was a very specific role. I mean, music editorial can cover lots and lots of different things, and it very much depends on the people involved, the directors, the composers, how they want you to slot into that. And a lot of times, it's a communicative role, and you're kind of making sure the director's getting what he wants, making sure he has a way of communicating with his music people, and making sure that the composer is getting what he needs, making sure that the support's there. You know, often you end up kind of slotting into all sorts of different roles. On The Lord of the Rings specifically, it was pretty much a score editing job. There was a lot of recording done on those projects, and it was a matter of going through those recordings, getting the best possible performance of every note. I mean, it was an incredible amount of edits on those scores. They would record a long time, and it was all live. There was no layering of scores like a lot of people do nowadays. It was all done live in the room. There would be a few of the sort of more ethnic elements that may be overdubbed later, but it all had to kind of feel like a performance whilst making sure you were getting all the best bits. So it was kind of taking all of the recordings, the hours and hours of recordings, and making what you hear in the film, basically editing together the best possible version. So that was the job on that. But that was kind of the only time I really did that in the years that I was music editing. A lot of the time you were involved more on that kind of communication side of things, more in the helping both sides make sure that they were working together as efficiently as possible, and making sure that the music was working as well as it could do for the film.
Stephen, I have once been told that a music editor sometimes has more control over the music and how it is presented than the actual composer. Would you agree with that statement? Have you ever experienced something like that? Or would you say the statement is rather false?
Well, the thing with the music editor is that is the person who's going to take the finished score and take that to the final dub, where the music is combined with dialogue and effects. So really, the music editor is the last defender of the music, and you get to a final dub, and hopefully the film's great. Hopefully everyone's getting along. Hopefully the sound and the music have been worked out in advance so that they perfectly complement each other. But, obviously filmmaking can be a kind of chaotic pursuit, and it can have an awful lot of people involved. And sometimes that isn't the case. And so the music editor, that in that case, is the person making sure that the music has its voice, and someone is supporting the music. So it's definitely a hugely important role. And now that, I'm composing my own scores, I take a lot of interest in who's doing the editorial job. If the picture changes when I've technically finished the job, I've delivered my score, then it's the music editor who is doing the edit to the music and is hopefully getting your intent, the musical intent, across when the picture has changed around you. So it is a hugely kind of valuable job, and a good music editor is once you have one of those, you really do want to hold on to them, because it's a crucial job, and
yes,
it's so political as well. They have to keep everyone happy. They have to have the trust of a director. It's a big role. And in an ideal world, everyone is communicated well throughout the process, and everyone knows what they're getting with the music by the time we get there. But there's always surprises, and there's always moments where, and everyone hears things differently as well. And I think with sound crews, sometimes there is a tendency to think of music as just another layer of sound, whereas, music doesn't really work like that. You can't cut a bit of music from one place to another place. Music has context. If you've got a peak in the music, you're going to build to that peak. If you've got a moment where the theme comes, you're going to want to plant that theme earlier in the film, and those are all kind of musical considerations that maybe don't happen with other people in the room at a dub. So a music editor is kind of crucial as a part of your team, really, to support that music.
Absolutely, a very important task. And sometimes, or on many occasions, the music editor also handles the temp track. That's right.
Absolutely, that can be an early role in the process, and again, that can vary completely depending on the film. There's been times when as a composer, I've had to work having reference to a temp track that's been done, but there's other times when I've started on a film very early, and I will actually provide the temp track as well, because we're evolving the score as it goes. And a music editor, will be part of that process, whichever way it is. I used to do an awful lot of temp tracks when I was music editing, and that was a really useful education. You hear a lot of music, you try a lot of things against picture, and it's a really sort of interesting process. I got to the stage by the end of my music editing career where I could see a scene and I could imagine 3 or 4 different ways of doing it and hitting that and stylistically doing things. And so, as a composer now, you're kind of thinking, well, what's the 5th way of doing it? What's the 6th way of doing it? What's the original kind of interesting way of doing it? So, it's actually a very valuable kind of part of my education. I see it now.
Yes.
At the time, it was terrifying, because you couldn't imagine how you were going to, get out of that and into the job that you wanted to do. But from the position now, you can see it was really valuable.
I mean, you worked on so many big movies as a music editor. I mean, you were also involved in Batman Begins in 2005.
Yeah, and that was that came off the back of the Lord of the Rings success. That's the only reason I got a meeting, I think, with Chris Nolan, and I was very much brought on as kind of his sort of music person on that. So I did the temp score for that, sort of cutting it from other things. There were demos coming in from the composers at the time, and then basically carried the score all the way through to the end, from sessions through to the dub. So it was a long-term big job. I mean, my main memory of that film is that Chris Nolan is an early riser and likes to be at work at 8 a.m. in the morning, and the composers definitely were not. So my main memory is just of calling friends as I was on my way to work and them saying, why are you talking so slowly? And I just got to such a level of sleep deprivation that I was making very little sense to anyone anymore. But it was an amazing film to work on, and an absolute privilege to see how Chris Nolan works, and to see how that sort of that whole Hans Zimmer kind of thing works, and James Newton Howard, who I think is an absolute gentleman and musical genius. It's great to be around all this stuff.
Yeah, I bet. And I'm certain it helped you a lot. Then in 2011, you had scored on the films Attack the Block and also The World's End. And then 2 years later, you started working on Gravity, for which you won the Oscar. And I've heard that the film at first was not supposed to feature any original score, and you had been hired to do the sound of the film. Is that right?
Not quite. No. originally I think the plan was that there wouldn't be no music. You know, it was going to play as a very truthful sound thing. But they'd got a long way into it. They'd got kind of 3 years into this process of making it, and it kind of wasn't working. And the studio had asked Alfonso to, you know, let's try music, and he didn't. He was kind of resistant to that because he didn't want film music. He didn't want, you know, this thing imposed on his film, which it was kind of cliched in his eyes. And he was kind of resistant to it. So the solution that they thought they'd try was getting in someone like myself who, you know, had done a lot of different kind of work and had been on various films, kind of music editorially, where there might not be a composer, and I would kind of work with songs or, you know, find ways, different sorts of solutions. He liked the film Attack the Block, which I'd scored a year before, and he'd heard that, and that was kind of a different sounding score, and you know, we played with different kind of styles on that. So I was called in for a meeting basically with this sort of open brief of like, they want me to try music, but I don't want film music. And so we then started talking about what music could do for the film, and it was really clear that it was this massive opportunity for music because the way the camera was moving, the way it was this totally immersive experience, the way that you were basically supposed to feel like you were in this journey with them. You were supposed to feel in space, and thus there is no left and right. There is no up and down.
Yes.
There is no, you know, there is no reason why music should come from the front of a theater even. You know, it could totally be guided by the movement of the camera and the way the film worked. And once we started talking about that, and then I went back to my studio and started trying a few sort of ideas that kind of sounded like the thing I talked about in the meeting, we just kind of started getting on with it. He responded well to a few demos of mine. And I ended up doing an entire pass on the film in like 4 or 5 weeks because we had some screening, which was the original reason for getting in. And it was all kind of original stuff. And he would kind of say, I like this bit. I like this bit. Where did you find this bit? And I would say, well, I just made it because there's nothing that sounds, you know, I can't, there is no way of temping this film. There is no music that exists that sounds like what we're talking about. And so it just kind of evolved from there, really. And that was an amazing experience. I mean, he's a genius filmmaker and, you know, loves his music. And, you know, with film music, we're as good as the way the music is presented, you know. And in that film, you know, music was front and center and was really allowed to carry huge amounts of
Yes.
the narrative, really.
Yes, I mean, there is also, of course, very little dialogue in the film. And you had to carry the emotion by creating sounds, synthesized sounds. And it must have been so challenging. I mean, going into this project, knowing that all this weight is on your shoulders, and especially at the end, I think the cue was called Chen Su.
Yeah.
That was, I think, the very best piece of music on the album, which also allowed you to write a little bit more thematically.
Well, thank you. I mean, that was one that was obviously a joy to kind of get to in the process, because it was one where you could kind of bring out the orchestra and a choir and let it sort of sing out, and you kind of the film had kind of earned that moment by then. You know, the lead character had been through all of this kind of stress and trauma, and all of a sudden this was her returning to Earth, and so it felt right that the music could kind of rise up with her and support that. But yeah, it was a tremendous kind of experience, and you know, it was very fortunate that I met that man at that time, and that film needed what we did, you know, because it was such a amazing opportunity for me. It's such like an unrepeatable canvas for music, basically. So yeah, it was a thrill. I can't believe my luck to this day.
How did you experience going into the Academy Awards? It must have been quite overwhelming.
Yeah, I mean, just very, very surreal. I mean, the great thing about that time was that Gravity, the film, had done well on so many levels.
Yeah.
That a lot of your friends, because we all worked so closely on that project, and we were all on it for such a long time, and the hours were insane. So you get to know people very well in an intense sort of period like that. We kind of, it was just all of us having this weird experience at the same time kind of made it fun, you know. It was when you look back on it, it's like, God, all these things happened really quickly, and surely that must have been kind of overwhelming. But at the time, it was just like, it just felt so much fun. And, you know, you were just incredibly grateful for the position you're in. And to this day, my main thought was, you know, after it happened and you know, knew the award was, you know, being given and stuff, it's just like, well, okay, spend the rest of your life kind of justifying this now and you know, hopefully proving that you deserved it back in the day. And I'm very aware it happened very early in my career. and very grateful for that. So it was an amazing sort of experience. Really, really met some wonderful people, and yeah, very, very, very grateful for it.
If I had been in there and they called out my name, I probably would have, suffered from severe heart attack, walking.
You know what? The best thing that happened to me in that entire run was that the first thing that I was ever nominated for in anything was the Golden Globes, and went to that and was so terrified. I was absolutely terrified, and the nerves, like for a couple of days beforehand, you were so nervous and felt so in the wrong place, and the old imposter syndrome and all that sort of stuff. And then it got to the announcement and I lost. And I remember afterwards going like, well, what was I so excited about? I mean, it's just, no one died. And so that was great then, because from that point onwards, you're like, well, okay, there's no point feeling awful about this stuff. This is like an amazing privileged position. Like, if you've got to enjoy this, if you can't enjoy this, that's ridiculous. So it was a good lesson that kind of nothing, it's a lovely thing and it's a lovely icing on the cake for a great project, but you can't take it too seriously because you'd go mad, I think.
I can imagine. And of course, Gravity, the success of Gravity also got you further gigs in the film music world. You did, Fury, starring Brad Pitt, and which must have been another very challenging project. I mean, you also brought back, great synth sounds. You recorded the orchestra at Abbey Road, if I'm correct.
Yes, that's right. Yeah. I mean, I was very fond of that film. It was a really intense kind of experience working with director on that film, because he was all about the kind of brutality of the war. Really, it was the first time that I think that someone had really gone that far with World War II. I remember the first conversations were all about, there's no place for beautiful, nostalgic kind of war music in this. There's never going to be the solo trumpet, as day breaks on the warfield. This is about how awful it was, and he'd done a lot of research, and so many of the images in that film were actually based on kind of documentary photography. It was gruesome, and the music was intended to show the weight that was on everybody, and the sort of the how awful and hard that life was, and them trudging through mud, and
yes, what
they would see, and the instantaneous end of it all. So it was, it was heavy to work on that. That was my main memory of it. But so I was very, very fond of the experience.
After Fury, you started working on, let's say, also on animated projects like Wonder Park, which is also, I think, a lovely score, and it shows your versatility as a composer. And one of my favorite scores that you wrote recently, you did that for the Netflix series, which is called Our Planet, which I'm very fond of. I mean, it's something else. I mean, it deals with real problems. It's not a movie. It deals with nature, with global issues. And they released your score as a 2 CD edition. And on top of that, you can on Amazon, for instance, they also released the scores for the individual episodes. And what can you tell me about this project, which I think might be your best work to date?
Oh, well, thank you. I mean, it was a project that came out of another show I did back in 2015 for the BBC, which was called The Hunt.
Yeah.
And that was my first time working with a company called Silverback Productions, who do an awful lot of work with Sir David Attenborough. And at the end of that project, they kind of mentioned that they were doing this thing for Netflix, and that it was going to be the first natural history show that actually talked properly about climate change and about environmental concerns. And it was a kind of huge thing, and they worked on it for 5 years. I mean, I was on it for the last year full time, and writing tunes for a good period of time before that. And it was 8 films initially of about 50 minutes duration. And the way they work, natural history, there's an awful lot of music. There's not a lot of gaps in the music in those episodes. So it was just a really huge undertaking. I think I did like 6.5 hours of music for that show, and there's no reused cues. There's nothing edited. It's all written to picture. And so it was this, again, an intense time. I feel like I keep saying that. But there was something glorious about it. You knew that you had to write every day. You knew that you had to get through a certain amount of scenes each week, or you'd kind of fall off the end of the schedule. and you'd never recover. And it was this incredible adrenaline thing. The films are great. The filmmakers themselves are fascinating, dedicated, kind of inspiring people. They all spend years making these things, and they will spend 6 months over,
Yes.
10 seconds of finished footage or something. They're all kind of slightly mad, but amazing people. And at the end of the day, the issue was the thing for me. It was, we were all doing it to hopefully kind of raise awareness before it's too late. So it did feel like you were kind of on a bit of a mission. And musically, that was very inspiring as well, because you want to do work that moves people. And the decision was made really early on with that my job was to respond honestly, emotionally to everything I saw, and that's what I kind of tried to do. And I'm really proud of it. And I hope a lot of people saw that show, and I hope gradually we're starting to kind of turn a corner in how people live their lives, when we need to.
Yes, absolutely. Very well put. And the album was tremendous. And I hope the show and the series will appeal to a large audience, and I hope it will continue to grow. I think your hard work, hard labor certainly paid off. The score was tremendous, and the album closed with the lovely song, which was performed by Ellie Goulding. I think did you write the music and lyrics together with her?
The music was kind of very kind of entwined with the score, and I've got this pet hate with films where you have the score and then at the end a song comes up which is totally unrelated. So when they mentioned that they would like to do a song at the end of it, I was kind of like, well, that's great, but can we have it feel like it's, part of the world that we're making? Can it be, linked to the themes? So when Ellie got involved, the first thing that we did was I sent her, I recorded 2 episodes at that point, I think, and I sent her some of the kind of thematic elements of it. And that kind of started her off with a chorus idea, which she then sent to me, and then I kind of arranged that and found a way to have my kind of theme chords working with that, and it kind of went back and forth. I mean, the lyrics are all her, and the verses particularly are very much sort of her melody, but we kind of come together for the chorus, and it's a sort of Our Planet theme with her own chorus thing there. So it was an interesting project to do, and again, hopefully someone like Ellie, who's got such a huge following, hopefully that just brings more and more people to the show.
Stephen, now I would love to talk about your latest film, Aeronauts.
Yes, lovely project to work on.
The score has been released digitally November 1st, as I mentioned before, and the film opened in the UK on November 4th, and it will premiere in the US on December 6th, and then subsequently it will be available on Amazon Prime Video as of December 20th. Did director Tom Harper approach you as you had delivered a certain score or sound which he was very fond of? Did you kind of say, that's the composer that I want for my project, or did you approach them?
They approached me on that one. We got sent the script. It was actually a person I'd worked with years ago on a project, was working for Amazon in the music department. And when they were looking for a composer for this, he kind of put my name in the hat, and they sent me the script. And usually with scripts, I'm kind of, I'm very easily distracted. And until there's moving pictures, I kind of, I don't really know what I'm doing. But with this, the script was so kind of, you could just imagine how this might look. You could imagine some of these beautiful images. These were people who were, the aeronauts who were going up above the clouds, and no one knew what was there. They were incredibly brave kind of adventurers in the Victorian kind of period. And, there was descriptions of them being up above the clouds and the storms that they might meet. There were descriptions of butterflies that would be up there, because there would be sort of certain air pockets where butterflies could be. The fact that it was so quiet up there, and you could immediately feel like there's going to be space for music here. And then I met Tom Harper, and he was just about to start shooting the film. And when I asked him how he was going to do these things, everything he was describing was kind of how I'd imagined it in my head. And so it felt like, we were kind of talking the same language. And musically, the sort of the stuff we talked about in that meeting, he seemed to get excited about the same sort of approach that I was excited about. So, I was thrilled when they offered it me. And then I started on that early, because we both decided that we didn't want, to run into any problems with temp music there, sort of distracting people, or studio people getting, attached to anything. So I kind of started work pretty early on it, really. And I've kind of worked on it 9-10 months in the end.
Which compositional challenges did you have to face on this particular film?
They were kind of self-imposed in lots of ways. I mean, the first thing that I talked about with Tom was this idea that, you know, they didn't know, the aeronauts didn't know what they were going to meet when they went up into the sky. They genuinely didn't know if it was going to be hot or cold, or, you know, what they would see. And we wanted to create that sense of wonder for an audience as well. And because they didn't know what they were going to see, there was no reason why the music should be a predictable thing, you know. And I wanted it to feel like the music was in the air and being carried on the wind. And so this self-imposed rule came into play that, you know, when we're on the ground and when we're meeting these characters and when we're flashing back to earlier in their lives, you know, a more conventional orchestra with strings could feature. But when we were up in the sky, everything would be kind of wind generated, whether that be brass instruments or woodwinds, or there's harmonium a lot of times. There's a lot of organ in the score. There's an awful lot of vocal work. And, you know, there's a fragility up there. There's just two people, for the most part, talking inside a very, very fragile balloon. We wanted to feel that. We wanted to be able to feel notes kind of at the very edge of how quietly they could be played. So that was kind of the challenge, really, just finding a way to capture this sense of wonder and find the voicings and find the thing that would feel unique to the project. So the first thing I did was work with a French horn player who taught me a lot about sort of different techniques of blowing and different overtones and things that were possible, and that set me off on my first sort of passage of work. And there's lots of textural ideas that came out of that. And then a huge amount of the score is kind of emotionally carried by pretty much brass bands, you know, quite a big brass section, but all playing very quietly, just to sort of get this sense of individuals sort of battling the elements a little bit.
How do you, as a composer, try to take the audience with you on a cinematic journey?
For me, it's a weird relationship. Music to picture and story is this weird thing. And when I kind of work on something, I've learned over the years that if I feel it, then an audience has got a chance of feeling it as well. And with that film, there were moments. For example, there's a storm sequence when our characters go up into the air very early on, and the balloon is getting battered from all directions, and the upwards and downwards motion is sort of uncontrollable. And I had to find a way, without doing conventional kind of, you know, orchestral string things, find a way. So it was almost kind of just throwing things at the picture and seeing if I could find something that was exciting me and was making my stomach lurch when the balloon dropped 100 feet in a split second. You know, so, and you try kind of vocal techniques, or you'd find sort of brass techniques, or you might process some playing and see if you can kind of get this feeling. And it's all very feeling based, and the picture always kind of tells you if you're getting somewhere. You know, it rejects an idea very quickly. Picture it just kind of, if there's no bond there, you kind of just feel wrong. You feel disjointed. You know, whereas when you're going up onto something, the picture suggests the next idea to you, and it's kind of, for me, it's like this really sort of back and forth process with writing something, putting it up against the picture, and you know, if it's going well, the picture will kind of suggest the next step for me, you know, and it will keep dragging me through the process. If it's not right, throw that out, start again, because it's not going to turn around, you know. So in order to take the audience there, I kind of have to just keep pushing until I feel it's there, and then I share that with my director and the editor, and they tell me if it's doing it for them, and you know, maybe they're feeling it slightly differently to me. Maybe we need to find out what the common ground is. So it's a process of evolving a score for me.
Some of the film's sequences had been designed for IMAX theater.
Yes.
Of course, using a different aspect ratio. When you watch these sequences, when they present you with the cut of the film, does this kind of impact your writing process? Do you go and say, well, this is so bigger than I had imagined it, I need to rewrite my my initial cue? Has it happened on that project, perhaps?
Well, with this one, it's been fascinating, because a lot of the biggest shots in the film are the quietest moments. You know, they're moments when the balloon is risen to such a great height, and it's actually very quiet, and it's actually very intimate, and it's this moment of kind of just beauty, really. And they're looking around and they can't believe the beauty that's around them. So oftentimes it was a matter of, this gave me genuinely more space. You know, it meant that there's very little sound up there. You know, there's very little audible wind. The music can be very, very still and very quiet, and there's a huge amount of kind of almost ambient music on the score, where things are very, very fragile, and you know, maybe it comes down to just a few instruments. So you know, there are a couple of big action sequences in there as well, where we did fill the theatre as much as possible, and certainly filled the surround. And we did a huge, great Atmos mix for this film, where music and a whole choir will whiz around your head as a storm passes by. But yeah, a lot of the shots that were specifically done for IMAX, they're very beautiful, very kind of quiet shots in lots of ways. They're more about the wonder of the thing than a huge scale kind of attack of the senses. It's more of a film to wallow in, really. I think it's a lovely kind of unique bit of work.
And as you just mentioned, the film contains some very quiet moments, and of course, as does your score. Would you say it can at times be more difficult and harder to not write thematically and kind of go for a ambient approach, or to be quiet? How do you experience that as a composer? What can be more stifling at times?
I mean, my tendency certainly is to be additive as a composer. I if I listen to something, I'm always going to hear a counter melody, and I'm always going to hear another little part and all that. And a lot of my process is kind of writing, and then kind of reviewing and seeing what's really crucial. And often you find that, there's a film I'm working on at the moment where what's becoming a very, very crucial part of it was a very late overdub that I did one day that at the time I did it was just a little decorative thing, but through the process of working, it's becoming this. You realize, oh, actually, that's the important bit. That's the bit that is needed, and actually, we don't need all these other bits. They're just kind of, supportive, but they're not necessary all the time. So a lot of the time, it's putting my brain into that sort of state where I'm just listening and responding to the film rather than, hanging on to ideas just because you musically love them. So it is tricky, but that's the satisfaction of doing this. Really, the fact that you're kind of, on a film, you have a bit more time than you would on a series, say Our Planet, where you can kind of really hone in on these things. And there were moments even in the dub of Aeronauts where Tom Harper would kind of call me up and go, I think that should be even more fragile there. I think we can actually pull a couple more things out. And there were moments that when I wrote them were a bit fuller than that, which in the film are quite kind of delicate and fragile, and very few instruments playing. So all part of the process. I like writing both. I mean, some of my favorite moments in something like Our Planet are the really fragile moments where we're actually covering a huge thing. I kind of like the fact you can actually make an audience lean in by not necessarily doing a huge thing with a huge visual event. Sometimes you can play against that, and it actually draws people in and kind of makes a massive thing more personal in a funny way.
And Stephen, did you also return to Abbey Road for this film?
Yeah, we did a lot of it at Abbey Road. I mean, Abbey Road is just like this joyous place for me to be, so I'll go there any excuse. But we did Abbey Road. We also did quite a lot of recording at a place called British Grove in Chiswick, which is a beautiful studio, incredibly well-equipped studio. And we did some of it there because that's quite a dry room, and there were moments where I would record the same music in a drier room like British Grove, and we close mic all the instruments, and then we record that same passage in Studio One at Abbey Road and use all the ambience in there, because when we were close up to people within the balloon, say when the camera is kind of handheld inside the balloon and we're very intimate situations, then we might pan out to a widescreen version, the IMAX thing, and that's when I would kind of use the Studio One recording and would suddenly have this beautiful surround kind of sound thing that would come around. So yeah, it was a combination of studios for that one, used for kind of story reasons, really.
Right. And Stephen, the album of Aeronauts also features some more intense cues or more action-oriented pieces, like For Science, for instance. How do you approach or write for action scenes or more action-oriented scenes? What's important when writing a fast-paced cue? Do you usually worry about the rhythm at first, or the theme, or the orchestration? What's usually on your mind there?
A lot of it is the rhythm for me. A lot of it is get a feeling like the pace is almost like the heartbeat of the scene, and that you're not kind of rushing the action. And that For Science was a tricky one in that respect, because it's a long sequence in the film, and you kind of needed to pace yourself and not hit. Visually, there was reason sometimes to go harder than the sequence would allow, and so you kind of had to sort of pull back and sort of make sure you got the arc of that right. I mean, certainly thematically, it's something that I think when you have a big action sequence going on, a lot of times you're holding the hand of the audience and you're helping them through, and thematic stuff is incredibly valuable for that. But again, for this film, we were looking for it to be fueled by this kind of different arrangement. So how am I going to use the brass instruments in this? A lot of the percussive stuff in those action sequences in Aeronauts is actually vocal. It's a lot of choir sort of chanting, and myself and my recording team all sort of standing around a microphone and yelling. There's a lot of that sort of stuff going on, and clicks from the woodwind players just hammering their instruments, and likewise with the horn players just playing the keys on there and not making any sound, not blowing, but just the percussive sound of that. So it's a combination of all those things. You're trying to make something unique to the film that really just keeps that spirit there, that keeps the audience on the edge of their seat, and hopefully makes that scene as immersive as possible.
Great. Thank you very much for sharing these great stories about Aeronauts. And can you already disclose some information on the film Archive?
Yeah, that's funny enough. The dub is going on for that as we speak. Archive is a science fiction film set in a sort of near future in Japan, and it's I took it on because it was I'd not done an electronic score for a long time, and it's not purely electronic. There's a few acoustic instruments in there, but I kind of I sit in the studio surrounded by all these instruments that I rarely get a chance to play, and I was coming off the back of a couple of years of doing sort of quite big orchestral things, and this idea came up of working on a more electronic score and kind of more it's very thematic, but it was time to play with a few sort of synths and guitars and that sort of stuff and make a different sort of noise for a while. So it's quite a low budget British film, but we're all very pleased with it. It's really punches above its weight. They've done amazing things with visual effects, and there's a really good story in there. I just read a script basically, and it was one of those times when you were really engaged with a script, and I had no idea about who was making this thing or whatever, but it just seemed such an interesting idea with such an amazing payoff that I kind of got in touch with them, and it's been fun doing it. It's a lot of music, and it's been a bit of a challenge, but I hope people will like it.
Right.
It should be out next year sometime.
Looking forward to it. And Stephen, as I understand, you had also scored the Disney nature film Dolphin Reef.
Yes, yeah. That was actually I did that before Our Planet, but it's just it's going to come out on the streaming service, the Disney Plus streaming service. So I think they've held it back for that. But yeah, that was a lot of fun. That was kind of it's a very beautiful film. That lots of underwater stuff, which is always really lovely to write music for, because the flow of water is so musical. And it's a very much a family film. So there's a lot of characterful stuff in there, and it's all about a dolphin called Echo. They give them names in those Disney nature things. But yeah, it's a charming little film. And again, got to record that with some amazing musicians in Abbey Road.
Yes, I mean, Disney nature feature films are usually very pleasant and very sweet, and it's fun to watch them, and it's very well produced. And I was also quite fond of penguins.
Yeah, no, absolutely, and it's a lot of the same filmmakers were involved in this one, and they're just real opportunities. I mean, natural history is a fun area to do music in, because they still value tunes, and they still value emotional music, so it makes it very satisfying for a composer, because you get to go with the thing that you feel would work. You're not trying to hide away as you sometimes do in live action films nowadays.
Stephen, I would like to thank you for taking so much time out of your busy schedule. I really appreciate that. It was a true pleasure talking to you, and I hope you enjoyed the interview as well.
I did. Thank you very much indeed. You've made it very, very easy for me. Thank you. Do your job brilliantly, so thank you.
Stephen, thanks again. It was such a joy talking to you, and I wish you lots of success. Thank you very much, and I hope you have a nice day.